Okay, Emily's in.
Yep.
Okay.
Hello.
7 p.m. Hi. Okay, it's 7 p.m., October 18th, 2022 in City Hall, 140 Main Street, Torrington, Connecticut. Time to call the City of Torrington Inland Wetlands Commission to order. Serving on the commission this evening are members Christine Altman, Emily Jury, Thomas Kalinowski, myself, Jay Bate, also Nate Nardi Cyrus, Inland Wetlands Enforcement Officer and Assistant City Planner. Okay. Next will be the minutes for the approval for the 9/13/22 meeting.
Move we accept the meeting minutes from the 9/22/22 meeting.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Sorry, I think it's 9/13, right? 9/13/22.
9/13/22 it says.
Okay. Yeah, I think I misspoke. I said 9/22.
Okay. Okay, so I have motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Emily?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next is old business. I guess the public hearing for updated wetlands map adoption. And there's nobody here. Usually I have to read something that was in the paper, or do you want to just push this off and do the new business first? So up to you. This shouldn't take long. It's basically open and closing.
Right. I don't, these are what we ran in the paper. This is the legal notice we got, but then
That's what was in the paper. Okay. All right, we'll do the public hearing. That was in the paper. City of Torrington Inland Wetlands Commission legal notice. Inland Wetlands Commission is scheduled a public hearing following matter on Tuesday, October 18th, 2022 in the City Hall Auditorium, room 218, 140 Main Street, Torrington, Connecticut. It's for the adoption of the City of Torrington Inland Wetlands, or the Wetlands Map revised September 12th, 2022. Time of hearing 7 p.m. Copy of the above mentioned revised map is on file at the Land Use Office, City Hall, 140 Main Street, Torrington, Connecticut. And it's Jay Bate Jr., Chair, Inland Wetlands Commission, dated in Torrington, Connecticut, this 4th day of October, 2022. Okay, so I guess we need a motion to open the public hearing.
I move that we open the public hearing.
I'll second.
Second.
Sorry, Emily.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thomas and Emily?
We got Thomas.
Emily?
Aye. Sorry, I think
Okay.
there's a delay with the audio.
Okay. Okay, motion carries. Do you want to go over the map or
sure.
just
There's
for the record? I don't think you need-
there was only 2 major updates made on the map. One was for revised wetlands at the corner of Albert Park Road and Kennedy Drive that were related to that application for the subdivision that we looked at the other day. And then the other wetlands were for forget the exact address, but it's on Torringford Street. I guess let's just find exactly where it is. It's between Cedar Lane and Trotters Road. And there was a small wetland identified there.
Okay.
So those are the only 2 small wetlands identified.
Any discussion from the members?
None here.
No?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Any discussion from our other 2 audience members?
I'm all set, thanks.
Okay. Okay, can I have a motion to close the public hearing?
I move that we close the public hearing.
I have a second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Huh?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. All right, now we just vote to, it's what, just to
To
accept.
approve the changes, yeah.
Yeah, approve the changes.
And make a motion that we approve the changes for the updated wetlands map.
Yeah, and just
Or that we adopt the changes for the
Yeah, for
wetlands map.
the one dated, whatever this date is, right?
Right, that should be on the legal notice there.
For October 4th, 2022.
No, that's the date they did this.
Oh.
It should be.
So,
Oh, there it is.
September 12th, 2022.
Second.
Oh, at 7 PM.
Okay. That's it.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, I got a motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye, motion carries.
Okay.
Okay, so we're done with that. Next will be new business. Applicant Haynes Aggregate, Torrington LLC, location 3217 Winston Road, and Winston Road must be lot 242-001-017. Activity, unintended discharge of pollutants into Still River wetlands. Okay, so what's the story on this?
So I'll let Ken and George talk about that, but from the land use office perspective, this was something that a violation that was noted by Jeremy Leifert when he was the wetlands agent, where there had been a noted discharge of sediment into wetlands adjacent to the Still River from the Haynes Company. And Jeremy sent a notice of violation to Haynes, and they promptly responded. And this is Ken's here to talk about kind of what they did to remediate that and the state of the wetlands now, and recommendations from their soil scientist.
So good evening. For the record, my name is Kenneth Ricca, professional engineer and licensed land surveyor, and I am here tonight on behalf of Haynes Aggregates Torrington LLC. And Nate, if it's possible, would I be able to share my screen with the commissioners?
Sure. Yeah, I have the thing up here, but I'll let you do it so you can navigate around
Great.
yourself.
I have one that's colored up, so it's going to make it quite a bit easier to see.
All right. Yeah, let me just stop sharing. My mouse is a little sticky. All right. See if you have, I might have to give you permission, but can you try to share and see what happens?
How's that?
Yep, there it goes.
Got it.
Perfect. I think this is, I have an overall view of the entire quarry, but this area is kind of confined to the southeastern corner of the property. What you're looking at with this thicker line here that I'm tracing is a property boundary line between the quarry that's permitted and the Torrington Drive-In. Both properties are owned by Haynes Aggregates Torrington LLC. So back in May, I got a call from Haynes that they received a violation letter that there was some silt coming out of the quarry, and it was actually going across Winston Road into the Still River wetland area adjacent to the walking trail. And we went out and took a look at it. And what had wound up happening is that during the process, they have, and I'll see if I can zoom in a little bit here. They have a sediment stockpile adjacent to a 50-foot buffer and the property lines. That sediment stockpile is basically part of the operation area where they mine the sand and gravel up behind the quarry, and then they bring it down to the processing area. And oftentimes they will wash the stone or wash the sand. And so they need a lot of water to do that. And they have these recirculation ponds that I've highlighted in blue at the bottom of the map. And so the process is that they put the stones on the conveyor, they wash it, the water overflows and then flows back into these ponds, and they keep using this water to wash their product. And the reason for that is that they're on city water here, and it would actually be a fortune to use the city water to wash the material, and then they wouldn't have a good place to dispose of it. So it really is a self-contained operation here with the water that they have. And it's basically fed by rainwater off the site. And what they have to do very often is clean the silt that gets caught up with the wash water, because that also migrates into these ponds. So they're constantly cleaning these two ponds out and taking the very small particles and stockpiling them. And that happens in this area where we're showing the sediment pile. However, during the course of the past few years, the sediment pile has gotten very large, and it actually expanded over the buffer area and into the drive-in, into this flatter area that you see here now. At one point, this was just a giant sediment pile. And it was fine because it really didn't go anywhere until apparently we had some pretty heavy rainstorms. And what wound up happening is that when the Torrington Drive-In was in existence, there was a drainage pipe that was installed here, and it's this lighter blue color. And my company surveyed this quarry in 1999. And as part of the survey, we surveyed this catch basin in Winston Road, and we saw a pipe coming into the basin, but nobody was able to find it. At that point in 1999, it was buried. And so the survey crews went out, and nobody could find where that pipe led to. There was just a hole coming into the catch basin, kind of from the direction that this blue line is facing now. And what it turns out is that the pipe ended here in a little earthen head wall. And over time, it filled in with material. Nobody ever really knew it was there. There was just a slight depression of land here. And since some of the heavier storms we've been getting over the past few years, there was enough rainwater flowing in this direction, apparently, to fill up that little tiny basin that was here and unclog the pipe. And that sent this whole property into motion, where they've got loose silt piled up here, raining heavily. It naturally flowed in this direction, and it got into this pipe that was formerly clogged for 15 or 20 years, into the catch basin system. And then, let's see if I can pan across here, under Winstead Road, out of an open head wall, there was silt in this area. And then there was a pipe installed under the bike trail, and all the silt ended up in this green blobbed area that we're showing on the east side of the paved bike trail. It was very obvious, and my survey crew actually did a field survey of the limits of intrusion of silt into the wetland area on the east side of the bike trail. That area is approximately 3,500 square feet of silt deposited into the wetland. And George will talk about this area more particularly after I'm done talking about what the Haynes folks have done. And so I'll pan down a little bit now. So the silt is there. It's May, very obvious. It was easy to tell what was going on because now there was a depression here, and I had the Haynes folks come in and they dug up the pipe and realized that this was here because there was sort of a hole in the ground where the water was just whooshing into it. All covered in silt through here, all gray, all bare land and wooded at that time. And as I mentioned, the silt pile had extended over the property line out and behind. So I instructed Haynes right off the bat, what they needed to do was uncover that pipe, put an elbow on it with a riser that would stick straight up out of the hole and be 3 or 4 feet above the level of the grade here, which would still be lower than the earthen berm protecting it. And then fill that area with riprap so that temporarily during the process of cleaning up the messes, if we did get a heavy rainstorm, the silt would flow into this riprap basin and have a place to settle before it carried on and did any more damage across the road. And so they constructed this riprap basin. And I'll see if I can pull in a little bit. And it's highlighted in green right here in order to do so. And they created a nice catchment area. And that gave them time to start working on cleaning up the silt pile. And the basin is still there now with the standpipe, but it's really kind of not effective because the product of their cleaning up this area, they wound up directing water in a lot of opposite directions, not headed towards this pipe whatsoever. So what they did, I'm going to try to give you a view that you can see most of what's here. The first thing they did was they cut in a swale across the drive-in property and directed it towards the rear of the drive-in. So while they were excavating and moving the piles, if we got any rainstorms, that water was still going to get carried away, and it would be stored in a sediment basin away from the highway and away from the highway drainage, with this riprap basin as a backup measure. And it seemed to work fine because we didn't have any more intrusion of silt into the wetlands or migration off of the property. They accessed through a roadway, which was the former drive-in exit, and wound up getting in here and restoring this area back to pre-silt pile conditions. They recreated a berm that was the buffer berm here and pulled back their pile beyond the buffer. So now the sediment pile is back out of the buffer zone, completely off of this area. They've reinstalled a buffer and actually replanted it. I can't tell you the exact year, but back when Haynes did not own the drive-in property, there was a lot of issues with the next door neighbor, and the next door neighbor didn't want Haynes quarrying because of a feud that was going on. And actually the owner of that property would come during blasting days and set up a lawn chair right here in this little peninsula that he owned, in hopes that maybe some blast stone would come and hit him and he'd be able to sue the quarry and get it to stop. That never came to fruition, but that's kind of the history of the berm being built here. The berm is now restored to where it's supposed to be. The buffer area is restored, and this entire area and anything that was disturbed is now seeded. This current swale on the southern side is still there, and it's still functional, and it still leads to a temporary sediment basin. At the toe of the slope of the swale of the berm, what they did was created a new swale to catch water coming off of the berm. And that new swale goes into a riprap swale. It's an earthen swale here that's been planted. It goes into a riprap swale and carries water back to the recycle basin, or the recirculation basin, and then created yet another swale on the north side of the berm to do the same thing, with a riprap swale that carries water back to the recirculation basin. So they moved the sediment pile, put a swale at the base of it that transfers water back to recycling, created a second swale to prohibit water from getting into this pipe off of the embankment, and they save that and use it as well. And then any water that goes beyond that into this much flatter area of land now gets captured and gets put back into this pond. And I had Nate out there this week to show him the progress. The seeded area is revegetating quite nicely. The grass is coming back. The swales are in great shape. There's really very little evidence of any silt back in here. So I feel, in my opinion, the restabilization of this site is taking place right now during this growing season, which is coming to a close. And they've restored everything back to the condition, the permitted condition of having a buffer area between the two properties, but they've added an effect of capturing water to stay away from a pipe that leads any of the flows off-site. So at this point, if the commissioners have any question about what they've done, or Nate wants to chime in and talk about the site visit, that's great. I don't have much else, but just the ability to answer questions at this point.
I have a quick question. So the sedimentation pile, you said was restored back to its original location. So has it essentially just been stacked on to the existing sediment pile that was at one point there?
No, they maintain this pile, and that's what they use consistently. Now I'm going to see if I can change screens here. This is a screen of the front operation area, kind of shows what we were talking about in the less highlighted area. This is the current quarry mining area, which I can also then zoom into here. This is a better one. And what they have is they have a back in, if you remember correctly, the last permitting, they permitted a joint mining operation. This is actually O&G's quarry here. This is the main bulk of Haynes Quarry, and the way it's set up is they have a work area here, and then a hillside that goes up to this corner, and then the grade goes back down into a big hole that was created during the mining process. They are now transporting silt area back into this hole and filling it up and bringing it up to elevation. The silt in here is protected by a berm that is still maintained between this hole and the quarrying operation area. So it really has no place to go. They were using water from this, and I believe there's still some areas up in here that do fill with water, and they tap into that water to do some washing, but they're restoring this area with some of the silt, which actually it's not really what you would consider an organic component like topsoil, but things still tend to grow in it actually pretty well. So I was surprised at how well stuff can grow in the silt, or vegetation that will grow in the silt, but they're storing it back in this much larger area so that they don't end up with the same problem they have. In the near future, it looks like Haynes or O&G is going to buy out the quarry, and they'll continue operations, and so they will continue to restore on this property as they go. I don't believe the drive-in property is part of that negotiation at this point. So moving forward, they'll be redepositing silt back into these areas that they're mining after they're done.
Okay, thank you. And that answered my second question. I was going to ask what the future plans were with this sedimentation, so that answered it as well. Thank you.
Perfect.
And then I have a question about the pipe that's coming out of the new basin, the old pipe that used to be blocked. I mean, it was blocked. What was the purpose, or is the purpose of it in the first place? Like,
That's a good question. I wasn't aware of its existence, even though I've been associated with this project since the late 90s, of what it was intended to be. The pipe is definitely on the drive-in property, the inlet, and that property line has not changed. So the
Okay.
inlet of the pipe is right here. My guess is it was a drainage feature for the drive-in, and when the drive-in was abandoned, it was neglected and filled in over the years. That makes the most sense to me as to how this
Okay.
all came to fruition. So at times there was probably silt flowing down through it, not necessarily even from the quarry, but
yeah.
just off of the drive-in that wound up filling the little basin. And nobody was around to maintain it because nobody realized that it even existed. And it wound up, kind of out of sight, out of mind until we had some bigger rainstorms. And then hydrostatic pressure and a buildup of water behind it apparently opened it back up and made it a viable conduit again. And the silt carried through it.
Is it necessary? Like, would it be?
It's
Something
not
that should be
necessarily
removed?
now, but it's weird because most of the pipe is in the DOT system. So it's not really necessary, but it's not the same configuration as it was either.
Okay.
It was just a dead-ended pipe that filled up with silt. It's currently a pipe with a T that comes, and it's a stand pipe at this end now.
Mhm.
So standpipe stands up approximately 3 feet above the bottom of the basin here. Which can function if the basin fills up with water, but it won't carry any silt because this will have to fill beyond 3 feet. And by the time it does that, water will start flowing around this pipe again. So it's not likely that that pipe will ever cause a problem like this again.
Okay.
And it's really kind of been, by what Haynes has done to create these swales, its usefulness is not really there either, but there's a process dealing with the state of removing a pipe like that, it's not the easiest thing because it then has to be cemented in, and it's a tremendous amount of work. And right now, it's still an emergency overflow. So if something does happen and water gets into this basin and fills up, it doesn't just overflow and go onto the road, it gets carried across.
Got it. And the depth of the basin is 6 feet or 5 feet? What is it?
It's about 4. I think there's a 1 foot elevation difference between this contoured 728 that goes around the basin and the top of the pipe. Yeah, there's a 728 you can see that comes across the access way, up around the basin, and then down the other side. And the top of the pipe is at 72707. So there's about 1 foot of what's called freeboard, or 1 foot of available buildup over the pipe outlet to still maintain and store water.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet. If nobody has any more questions, George, you should jump in.
Sure, I can jump in. George Logan here, Ream Ecological Services. Is it a possibility for me to share my screen?
Yeah, you should be able to do that if, yeah, Ken shuts that down, you should do it on
Here we
there.
go. Let's see, where do I want to go? Here we go. So you should be able to see this. Now I'm going to make it a little smaller. So this is one of my first figures. So backing up, Ken called me back in probably late June, early July, and said, George, we have a problem. I'm like, okay, what's the problem? He explained it. And so I think we were out there once before I did my first long visit, which was in July. And then I came back in October. Just wanted to see what the progression of vegetation was in those intervening months. So the first thing that I did, and this is a photo that you see here from, really it's my little GPS utility that I have on my phone. So I'm able to kind of follow myself around. That's the blue trail that you see there poking in. And first thing I did is I sort of delineated the wetland. And you see those 6 flags on Ken's map. And so that we have an idea at least where the wetland is. Then the little green line is my interpretation based on the aerial photography of where the limits of the silt were, but that's kind of rough. And of course, the survey was a lot more accurate than what I've done here. So what I wanted to do is, and this was kind of an interesting thing. I don't think I've ever come across this kind of situation before. It's always something new, and which is challenging. And I love that kind of challenge, obviously, is to look at the vegetation within this affected area. And I did, I think, 4 holes that were representative of what I saw. And I looked at areas that, because the wetland that's out there sort of was a mosaic of meadow marsh and shrub. So I sort of took some representative samples of different areas based on different types of vegetation. And then I did one outside in the unaffected area within the shrub area to sort of see what it was. And you probably saw my report that I have a table in the back that have sort of cataloged the dominant species in each one of these test holes or plots, if you will. I also figured out what the hydrology was, and also what the depth of the silt was, or the very fine sand. It's probably more towards a very fine sand than actually a silt. but it's probably a combination. So this, again, from my little GPS utility, this was my test hole 1 at the I guess the southern end of the affected area, and you'll see pictures in a moment. Test hole 2, plot 3, follow the blue line, I guess. Then I went off into this area 4, sort of near the edge of the affected area, and then 5 was no fill. And then I also looked at where the discharge was, kind of plotted that. A few pictures here to sort of kind of remind you what's out there. Whoops, wrong way. I guess this is the trail. Here's the pipe that's coming in, and you can obviously see the very fine sandy material, and of course we have some Japanese knotweed there, and which is not good, and some glossy buckthorn here, which is not good, but that's kind of where we are. Test hole number 1, sort of in a scrub shrub situation. Alder was dominant. You see some tussock sedge. You see the exposed area with the silt. And here's a picture that I took. And then this was test hole plot 2, coming a little more to the north. And here you kind of see the original organic soils at the tip of the auger, and then this material that we're talking about here. The test hole 3, and then test hole 4, and then 5. This is the unaffected area. And again, I cataloged everything that I could. And then I just went just a little beyond this, maybe, I don't know, 10 feet. And there's a sort of an intermittent channel, sort of a side channel. Not sure if that originates in some other pipe. There was really not any effective and any silt in it. And then the Still River is further in. So those again in July, and then I always like to take a scenic picture of just up gradient or downriver to the north. Still River obviously goes north, and I had some pretty nice wildlife that I cataloged in there, but that's not what we're looking at. Then I went back in October, and I sort of give you sort of an idea. What you notice is some of the vegetation that was small or not identifiable obviously has popped up. Like here you have woolgrass. It's full glory, if you will. Here's another picture of hole in plot 1. And you can see the vegetation is a little more dense, grown. In test hole 2, again, a lot of woolgrass, and you can see the swamp rose here with the little red hips already, and then same picture as before. But so, and then of course I have all of this, and what you will notice from even the 1 through 4, which is in the affected area, that all the species there, the dominant species, are all of wetland species. Now here's a meadowsweet, FAC plus, red maple, FAC. That's facultative, but most of them are obligated or facultative wet species, as you can see. And then at the bottom, I kind of told you what the sediment was. 1, so we have up to 20 inches in hole 3, which is sort of centrally located, and then 7, which is at the edge for hole 4, and then 0 for that one. This gives you an idea of the quarry as it was done. Let's see, what's the date on that? 2020, sometime in 2020, so probably not September, but a little earlier than that. Here's the steady area. And what you note from the soil survey map is that it has this 18. So the 18, if you come down here, is Catherine to Freetown soils. These are organic soils that are more than 51 inches deep. So these are the deep mucks. So there could be more than that, but that's sort of what this is. And that's it. So what did I surmise from all this? Well, this was a very interesting thing, and I've seen this situation once before where if you have, and I saw it in the coastal zone down in, where was I? Mystic, I guess. Where you have organic soils, and in that particular case in Mystic, it was muck, but tidal muck. So that was Westbrook muck, tidally influenced, which was filled with 3.5 feet of fill. And the gentleman that did it back before 1972, before the regulations were in, thought that if you put 3.5 feet of sandy fill on top of muck, that he resulted in a non-wetland. Lo and behold, it's still a wetland. Why? Because all that weight of the overburden depressed the muck down until it reached an equilibrium. And that's exactly what's happened here. The hydrology of this wetland is still saturated, and was saturated before this fill came in here. It's still saturated now because of the weight has basically depressed the muck, displaced it or depressed it. And the hydrology is exactly the same as it was before you. There's barely a difference in elevation between the non-affected area and the affected area. And it obviously translates by of all this obligate vegetation, profusion of vegetation that's growing on this stuff. And like Ken said, which is very interesting, the stuff will grow things. And you're like, well, how does that happen? Well, it's loaded with phosphorus, right? Anytime you have this kind of very fine stuff, and I've seen it, there's areas in Connecticut which have silt loams or silty clay loams very, very close to the surface. And they grow profusely because there's tons of phosphorus is released. And you're like, okay, phosphorus is one. How does the nitrogen come around? Well, the nitrogen comes around either from atmospheric fallout or from the overflowing of the Still River and everything that's basically recycled in the system. So I looked at that and I wanted to come back and see back in October to see if there was any difference, to see if this vegetation that was growing, through the season would fill in more, and it did. So at first I was like, well, we got to do something. And then I started thinking about it. Okay, the hydrology hasn't changed. The community hasn't really changed. It's still the same as it was before. There might be some selection of certain species over others based on, my comparison of the last plot with the, there were some things that were missing out. And one thing that usually misses out is ferns. Ferns are a little more sensitive. And so you'll see ferns going out in the non-affected area, you won't see them in the affected area. But for the most part, if you're looking at functions and values, yes, you probably have lost some of the microbiology within the organic soils, and some of the invertebrate base is probably not there now that was before. But that's going to start replenishing itself as every year goes by. That organic layer is going to start building up again, sort of, from the vegetation as it recycles, as it desiccates. So it is a physical impact. It's by all accounts something that would, raise everyone's eyebrows. But what has happened now is that it is a very viable, functioning wetland, very much similar to what's around it. And for us to go in and do anything would basically disturb the area, wouldn't accomplish anything, because you can't really come back and if you take the silt out, that you're going to get this rebound. You might get a little bit of rebound from the mucks, but you're not probably going to get much. So you're going to end up with a completely different look, completely different community. And my fear is a saturated situation is great because cattails don't do very well. But one of the pictures that you see here is, as you look across in this shallow ponded water, what you'll see is well, you'll see Phragmites and you'll see cattail, which are the two species that have taken over. Whereas in the situation that we have here in this affected area, cattail can do very well when it's competed out by all these other species that like this saturated regime year-round. It's saturated, and of course, when the river overflows, you have some temporary flooding, but that then dissipates back. So my conclusion in my report was that as long as the folks on Haynes are doing what they need to do so that doesn't continue happening. Sorry, I hope I didn't get you dizzy here. Again, the only recommendation, as I said here, would be to make sure that the source of the tailings be remediated and does not continue affecting this area in the future. And so that's sort of my conclusion, which was even surprising to myself when I looked at it a little more carefully and realized what was going on. Yeah, we have a little bit of a different soil microbiology that's going on. That's going to change over time, but as far as the other functions and values, they remain unaffected because the hydrology has been maintained. So that's my I guess my summary of my study. So I'll stop sharing the screen. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to try to answer them.
So in that case, Nate, your report, Nate, is consistent, your recommendations are consistent with Mr. Logan's recommendations of leaving the sedimentation in place in the affected area?
Yeah, when I went out with Ken on the site, I have some background in wetland plan identification, and I was also surprised that it'd be hard pressed to even to a casual observer notice that there was anything going on there because the vegetation growth was so dense. And the only thing invasive that I really noted was purple loosestrife, which was already on the site anyway in other locations, and that's not surprising. So I was pretty pleased with what I saw. I was wondering if George actually could talk about the condition of the culvert pipes running under the trail, and if you noticed that the sediment out of that had been cleared, and or if those pipes were at all impacted, or if there's still sediment in them.
Well, you saw that the one picture that I took in July. I did not go back and take a secondary picture in October. My guess is that situation remains. So the pipe is probably half full in that section. I can't tell you what's going on above it and across the road. But as Ken has said, there's limited contributing area. It's been limited, which is good. And there's also a standpipe, which will remain, Ken?
Yes.
Foreseeable future, which is an added protection. So if that's the case, then I don't see that anything has to necessarily be done there.
So was that that sediment picture, that was what was passing under Winstead Road, or was that what was originally passing under the rail trail?
I can answer that because I've seen that many times. That picture of the pipe with the sediment in it is the pipe, the final outlet pipe prior to where the sediment was deposited. So it's the outlet portion of the pipe that goes under the trail.
Okay.
And Nate, when you and I were out there, we were looking at that very spot, and you can't see silt there anymore. It was just clear water. How much clear water was hard to tell, but it didn't appear that, even though you could see through the water, that you could tell that there was silt there. It looked deep, so it's hard to tell whether there's still silt there or not. It seems like the culvert is functioning better than it was because it clearly wasn't, solid, or we couldn't see that it was solid halfway up the invert of that pipe.
Thanks for the clarification, Ken. Yeah, I wasn't sure, based on our visit, I just wanted to confirm that wasn't the pipe coming under the road, but if that was in fact the one under the rail trail, that did look clear to me when we were there.
Okay, so the pipe under the rail trail is clear. There's no sediment in it?
It's difficult to tell because it's flooded above the culvert right now. So all you see kind of a consistent level on both sides of the rail trail. So it's an assumption that they're.
And my concern is
connected.
with the water coming back and forth by the rail trail, it's gonna push more sediment into the wetlands. If that pipe isn't cleared. Because there's no water coming through the main, the way I'm understanding, the pipe comes down off of Haynes property and discharges, and then it gets picked up by this other pipe. There must be a break between the two, or is it one solid pipe that now goes under the rail trail?
Can I share my screen again by
Sure.
chance?
Yeah, you should be able to do that.
Because the rail trail pipe has to be much newer than the other pipe.
Okay, the rail trail pipe is an 18-inch pipe, and it has an outlet and an inlet on either side of the trail.
Right.
There's a break where water flows out of this is the Connecticut DOT system pipe. So this is also collecting highway water as well.
Oh, okay.
That's its intention here, is to collect highway water. So it's a DOT pipe. That has a concrete head wall here, outlets. Water flows out of that overland and then into the pipe that goes under the trail and then into the wetland of concern. The Haynes pipe / drive-in pipe starts on private property, immediately goes into the right-of-way, and then ties into the state's drainage system here.
Okay, so we're saying that the pipe from the DOT, that pipe is clear now?
It appears to be.
Okay.
When you
And the
look
pipe, okay, and the other pipe that goes underneath the rail trail, is that clear? That's the one we can't tell.
it appears to be, but it's in a submerged condition because the water has built up in the wetland and is backflowing through the pipe. But it's, when you were looking at George's report, it appeared that the pipe was half full. You could still see outlet of the pipe here, but when you're looking through the water, it does not appear that there's silt. There may be, it's really hard to tell. And there's no silt deposits at the inlet anymore where there was at one point. So there was silt on both sides and a big area of silt in the middle. I'm wondering that during some of these bigger storms we've had, if this didn't kind of get washed out since no more silt was being contributed, it's hard to tell.
Okay.
And it is part of the state's drainage system, which they're required to maintain. I can tell you that in May, when I looked into this catch basin, it was pretty filled with silt. It is clean now. So
Okay.
the state came along and cleaned this basin, and that might be helping with the rest of the system as well.
So I did take a picture and I'll show it on the screen so everyone can see it from when I was there with Ken. But that's what that pipe looks like outletting to the wetlands, where he's
Okay.
saying it's clear, like you'll
Yeah.
see no sedimentation in there, but it's submerged.
Yep.
Yeah, you
So,
can't see it.
and I'll put it in front of the camera so you all can see it as well.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as you're looking at that picture, it's pretty hard to tell whether there's silt there or if it's just a
Right.
submerged condition.
I mean, with all the rain we've had in the last 3 weeks, I would think more than likely would have washed anything that was in there out.
Yeah.
It seems to have, there's definitely no backup in the state system. But once you
When
get,
you look out into this area where it filled with sediment, can you see the sediment now, or is it just all vegetation?
I could not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, under like even plot number 1, which you saw the first picture
Mhm.
was, had some exposed when I went there the second time in October. I could still see some of the silt, but it was filling in, which I would have expected. And then I couldn't see any silt anywhere else. That was the only area that I could see it, because it's maybe a little more shaded. Out in the meadow marsh area, the emergent area, dense as could be. You could see no sediment whatsoever.
Okay.
So what's the action that we need to take on this?
You just need to approve the permit. So I mean,
Okay, so it's
they're
not,
accepting the permit at this meeting, so we would be making, you would be making a decision at the next meeting.
Okay.
But it would be like any other.
but it's
permit,
just,
but
It's
like-
already
okay,
done
so it's a,
that, right?
it's a permitting process
Right.
for work
yeah,
that's already been
Exactly.
accomplished.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. All right, so I move that we accept the application for Haynes Aggregate Torrington LLC, 3217 Winston Road and Winston Road 242-001-017 for unintended discharge of pollutants into Still River wetlands.
I second the motion.
Motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, folks. Have a wonderful night.
You
You
too.
too.
Thank you.
Okay, next is staff report. The enforcement report update.
Yep, so the only thing I have that's come up since then is at 137 Babbling Brook Road, which is up in the northern part. It's off of, gosh, I don't even know, like going up towards
Sawmill
Lansing.
Hill.
Yeah, exactly, off of Sawmill Hill. There was we were alerted to a zoning violation, potential zoning violation, and for setback, violation of structures in the setback. And once we got on site, I noticed that there, and looked back at historic aerial photos, a section of a small intermittent stream was piped and through under the yard. The yard was drained, lawn was established, and some rock basins were set up in the stream, all without permits, as well as other extensive work in the upland review area.
Is that the house that's for sale?
No,
Where was
Or
this?
is it? the
Babbling Brook
Okay.
Road.
You know where that is?
So we're, the landowner has been, cooperative and is going to be submitting an application similar to this, an after the fact application. And commissioning a wetland scientist to assess it. And so I'm working actively with them to submit something either for the November meeting or the December meeting.
Is that back lot?
It's right on it's right on the road. It's about 3
Okay.
acres. The owner is James Mazzarelli,
No.
The son or,
the son.
okay,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Is there a stone wall on the property?
There are stone walls. So that's the only enforcement action that's come up recently that I've, other than catching up on the backlog of enforcement cases from Jeremy's time, and nothing,
Okay.
has rose to the occasion for that.
And next agent determinations.
So 56 Oak Brook Lane was the conversion of a deck to a home addition in the upland review area. So they're going to be keeping all operations out of the
Mhm.
wetland there. And then 887 Midgeon Ave this is a new self-storage unit that's going up on Midgeon Ave next to former Scarpelli's, where the
Mhm.
Sonic is going
Oh,
up.
okay.
There's a very tiny lot that you almost wouldn't even think you could fit a storage
Yeah.
unit area, but it goes far back to
Yeah.
the Naugatuck
That's kind of
River.
perfect, actually.
Yeah.
right? Like a driveway with a bunch of little boxes.
Exactly, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And so, so they, behind that property is the Brunswick Company, if you're familiar with
Yeah.
that. And so there's a fairly large buffer between there and the Naugatuck River, and really only the very small bit of the back where they're gonna be doing improvements is in the 100 foot upland review area. And then commissioner update, membership update, I wanted to add that in there, because obviously, it's hard to have a commission of 4 and make quorum. I did have a lead on that. Paul Cousins, our city engineer, referred Craig Bothroyd. I don't know. Do
I
you
don't know
know
him.
who
What's he do?
He is a contractor. He works for Yield Industries, but I spoke with him. He said he was potentially interested. I believe it was his father who had been on an inland wetlands commission, and
Okay.
he has a lot of knowledge of, of development practices. So he'd probably be a good addition. He said he was gonna let me know within the month, and told me I could bother him and ask him again. So he's kind of holding his cards close to his chest. I don't know if he's actually gonna
Okay.
do it, but
Okay.
if anyone else could, knows anyone and wants to recruit, I'm gonna try to put up a flyer in the land use office, and try to, talk to people as they're doing their other business, but
Okay.
that's all I have.
All right.
And next adjournment.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye, motion carries.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Thank you, guys.